As a baseball owner, Bill Veeck was unique. Born to the leisured class, his heart lay in the bleachers. He was fresh air and popcorn and free beer. Every day was Mardi Gras, every fan a king. He so deeply loved the game, he lived in a ballpark for 2 years. For 15 wonderful seasons, Bill Veeck worked to change the somber face of baseball, pinching its cheeks, pulling its ear, and making it smile. Some said like a clown. But underneath Veeck's own good cheer, there lived a serious man who believed deep in his gut that baseball belonged to the people.
Bill Veeck was one of the great, jolly men who walked the earth.
Bill Veeck considered his role as owner of the ball club as custodian of the franchise for the fans.
I thought, as far as baseball went, he was as close to a genius as we ever had. He was a great thinker. He was a voracious reader. He was a man who could speak on any subject.
Veeck liked to have, I'm going to use a very esoteric intellectual word now. He would appreciate it. Fun!
Why don't we start off with controversy?
I guess that's the story of my life.
Veeck never got along with any of the owners of baseball because they saw him as a tremendous radical.
The American League hasn't spent much time worrying about the city of Chicago's rights to coerce us into doing something we think is not only illegal, but is stupid.
To Major League Baseball owners, Bill Veeck is a very pointed stone in everybody's shoe. And to Major League fans, Bill Veeck is the guy who said, let me help you, untied the shoe, took the stone out of it, and said, to hell with the other owners. I know what you want, I'm going to give it to you.
Bill Veeck understood that this was a big, complicated, diverse country, and that baseball ought to represent that.
Bill Veeck was actually one of the few men I've known in my life without prejudice at all.
When he was a boy, Bill Veeck received the gift of tolerance from his father, president of the Chicago Cubs.
He told me a wonderful story once about his father taking him down in the box office. And there was money piled everywhere from the ticket office, and they're counting receipts. My grandfather said to my father, what color is that money? He said, it's green. And he said, can you tell the color of the person who put that money through the window? No. He never forgot that.
3 months after Jackie Robinson broke the Major League color barrier in 1947, Veeck signed the first black player in the American League, Larry Doby, to the Cleveland Indians.
When that happened, it was just exploded like a time bomb. We knew about Jackie Robinson, but nobody even considered, a black player.
The one statement he made that I know that made me quite comfortable was when he said, we're in this together.
Veeck didn't only sign Larry Doby. He then went out and he signed Satchel Paige, and he signed Minnie Minoso, and he signed Al Smith, and he signed Luke Easter.
When Veeck signed Satchel Paige, the ageless Negro League pitcher, it set off a stampede of curiosity and controversy.
Well, they thought it was exploitation, and it really wasn't, because if you recall that in 1948 he was 6-1 at the end of the season.
Oh, he helped win the pennant for him that first year he was there, no question about it.
There was also no question that Veeck despised any form of social injustice. When he moved to Maryland's Eastern Shore in the 1960s and learned the local movie theater had segregated seating, he took matters into his own hands.
So then he got his own movies, and he showed them at his house to a mixed audience of kids who were black or white or whatever from the schools where his kids went. And he said, we all sit together here, and they'd have popcorn. They had a popcorn machine.
It didn't also make us wildly popular in a lot of ways. This is a state that carried George Wallace.
When nearby Cambridge erupted in racial violence, Veeck offered his home as a free zone where civil rights leaders, business representatives, politicians, and the National Guard might seek a solution.
Bill Veeck was involved in marches, and in protest. He really was out there fighting for integration of the entire society. And that wasn't easy to do on the eastern shore of Maryland.
One day when the truth really come out about his concerns to make this a great nation, Bill Veeck will be one of those that will be at the head of the line.
Veeck's boldest and most controversial mission was his thwarted attempt to break the color barrier in 1942.
Bill Veeck made the terrible, terrible tactical mistake of informing the baseball commissioner that what he planned to do was buy the Phillies and hire all players from the Negro Leagues. And the commissioner scotched the sale.
The main problem with the story is that it never happened. The time frames are all wrong, that the money really wasn't there for Veeck to do this.
So this leaves us with a puzzle. Is this something that Veeck really did try, but there's no trail? Is this something that Veeck maybe thought about and but never really did?
If there is no paper trail, there is persuasive testimony that Veeck's attempt to buy the Phillies was not a mere figment of his fertile imagination.
This got around that you hear that Mr. Veeck gonna buy the Phillies, and he gonna stock it with a Negro League baseball team. And everybody, oh man, we were ready.
He had it all thought out that he was going to have 2 training camps, one for the old Phillies and one for the new Phillies. And when opening day would come around, why he would have the new Phillies to startle the world.
That one act really robbed Veeck of what would have been a very, very important place in American history. Because he would have been the man to, in effect, break America's racial barrier.
Bill Veeck grew up in the Chicago suburb of Hinsdale.
I think they had a very pampered life. They had a big staff at home that took care of them. Wherever they went, they often went in a private railroad car.
William Lewis Veeck, Sr. was a very elegant man. He was always referred to as Mr. Veeck, with whom everyone that he worked. Very proper. And so it was natural, of course, that my dad would veer in the absolute opposite direction.
With Wrigley Field as his second home, Veeck grew up listening to the colorful language of the dugout and locker room and emulating such stars as Grover Cleveland Alexander and Hack Wilson. Both were heavy boozers.
When he was underage, he would go into the speakeasies for a few drinks with friends of his at 15 and 16 and 17 and the hoodlum places that he's not supposed to be.
He was very mischievous as a kid. Not a troublemaker, but an agitator.
Bill Veeck was born on the right side of the tracks, and as soon as he was capable, drug himself to the other side.
Veeck's carefree youth ended abruptly at the start of his sophomore year at Kenyon College in Ohio. His father had fallen ill with leukemia. Veeck rushed home to Hinsdale.
All deaths are tragic, but this one seemed so sudden. Bill quit college after that, so it changed his life.
At 19, Veeck took an office job with the Cubs. 2 years later, in 1935, he married Eleanor Raymond, who had a wild streak of her own. She had left college to become a circus performer. For the next 5 years, he poured his energies into the operation of the Cubs.
He learned a great deal about the business because he worked every aspect of the business. He learned to count tickets by sound. He could hold up a strip of tickets and tell you how many there were.
Bill actually planted the vines at Wrigley Field, which had to be a goofy idea. And everyone said, they'll never grow. Well, let's try it. Well, they grew.
At 26, Veeck was promoted to treasurer of the Cubs. But his ideas proved too risky for the likes of owner Philip Wrigley. And in 1941, Veeck swung a deal to acquire the financially strapped Milwaukee Brewers of the American Association.
And so Milwaukee became this wonderful, careless rapture, this marvelous palette, to mix colors, and try all the things that for years had been festering and that he'd never been able to do under the, shall we say, somewhat conservative stewardship of the Wrigley family.
He took over a team that was about 20 games out of 7th place. Before you knew it, the following year, 42, they were fighting for the pennant.
Veeck became completely absorbed in turning the fortunes of the franchise. But long days at the park, which stretched into long nights courting sports writers, were causing trouble in Veeck's marriage.
Bill had to work with the entertainment, the business field, let's say the real world, where my mother was very much an idealist. And she didn't approve necessarily of some of the stuff that went on.
With an increasingly shaky marriage and the nation deep into a world war, Veeck joined the Marines in 1943. As an anti-aircraft gunner in the South Pacific, he suffered an injury that would only deepen his commitment to live each day to the fullest.
He got too close to the weapon and it recoiled, and the recoil crushed his right foot.
And Bill developed what was called jungle rot, and his leg just kept falling away.
For a man who was operated on 37 times, an amputee, he didn't discuss the war at all.
There was never a day after, I always thought, World War II that he took for granted. I don't think there was one single day. So I think that always made him really go, I'm okay, you know, it's all right. It's like, we got this problem when we're, you know, and the gate's not very good, or I'm not sure what's going to come next year, but that's not like looking in that foxhole.
After 22 months in a number of military hospitals, Veeck returned home to an ultimatum from his wife: baseball or family.
Baseball was the only thing in the world for Bill. And I guess horses were the only thing in the world for her.
They're both very strong individuals. Probably they shouldn't have gotten married to begin with.
To save his marriage, Veeck sold the Brewers in 1945 and moved his wife and 3 children to a guest ranch near Tucson, Arizona. The next spring, an old friend visited him. They went to an exhibition game and talked baseball.
It just got him all over again. By the time we left that night after the game, he was determined to go back into baseball and forsake the ranches.
With the marriage grown cold and baseball pulling at his heart, Veeck left his family and plunged headlong into one of the most spectacular ownership careers in baseball history. In June of 1946, Veeck made a theatrical entrance into the major leagues, beating the deadline to buy the Cleveland Indians by just 5 minutes.
Immediately you could sense that something was going to happen because this guy was different.
First thing he did was open all the games to all the broadcasters free. So all the stations broadcast the games. This was wartime. Got nylon stockings for the women he gave away. Gave away flowers to the women. He gave away pigs. He gave away goats. He gave away chickens.
You'd come in there on a Friday night and you'd have 65,000 or more in the stands, and the next day you'd be latest day, you'd have 60,000 women out there.
The word was if you went to the stadium often enough, sooner or later, Veeck would come by and sit down with you and be talking to you.
And they would tell him, they would say, Mr. Veeck, you know, you got to do something about the beer. You know, by the time we get to the bleachers, it's not cold. Something like that, something would be done.
Cleveland's a great industrial town. Some of the factories worked around the clock. Bill used to have a trunk full of beer in the back of his car all the time and would meet the workers as they came off the 4 o'clock in the morning shift and things like that. Sat around and talked baseball with them.
Promoting the Indians with the passion of an evangelist, Veeck gave hundreds of speeches a year. By night, he traveled with Cleveland's social luminaries, known as the Jolly Set by local newspaper columnists. Once, Veeck threw a party for the anointing of his first artificial leg.
And he danced all night. And when he took off that artificial leg. It looked like a raw hamburger.
I think it set back his recuperation for months and months to come, and I mean that seriously. But Bill had to be the life of the party.
He never gave into it. He would always be affronted when people would refer to him as handicapped. And it was the closest I saw him get to a snarl. He'd say, I'm not handicapped, I'm crippled.
Veeck's magical Cleveland revival crested in 1948, when a record 2.6 million fans jammed Municipal Stadium to watch the Indians win the pennant in a thrilling three-way race, then beat the Boston Braves in the World Series.
And I think the players had great respect for him. And I think there was something about winning one for the Gipper. I think everybody wanted to win for Veeck, along with themselves.
As he stood atop the baseball world, there was no one to share the glory. He was almost completely estranged from his wife and young children.
Growing up, I didn't know him. He wasn't there. Didn't feel one way or another.
She wanted to close the door and get on with her life, whatever that was. And she felt that she didn't want the children associating with Bill at all. That was quite clear.
Veeck, meanwhile, flew his 11-year-old son, Will, into Cleveland for the last game of the World Series.
His oldest son was not interested in baseball at all. He would sit in the box and he'd read a book.
Bill said that he turned to him and asked him why he couldn't be something he could be proud of, like a scientist.
You've just won a world championship. You've just set an attendance record. You've just seen some of the most remarkable athletes ever assembled on one field, and you've made more money than you knew ever existed in the world. And you go home at the very end, when you can no longer find a place to go. And when you get home, and there's virtually no furniture, but there is a music box, you know, and you put Sinatra on the box and you watch the sun come up by yourself, everything pales.
A year later, Veeck met Mary Frances Ackerman, a 29-year-old press agent for the Ice Capades. Veeck, who was 35, proposed twice that first week. They would marry the next spring.
I've never seen love like I saw with Bill and Mary Frances Veeck. They could walk into a room, and he'd be on one end, she'd be the other, and you could see sparks fly. And they were in their 70s, 60s, and 70s. It was the darndest love affair I have ever seen.
I remember one day my dad planted my mom's initials in daffodils, and they came up in the spring, and there it was, MFV, right across the front lawn.
The fact that someone is loved so deeply, so unquestionably, allows you to do all sorts of wonderful things without wondering, was I too loud? Was this too on? It didn't matter because Mary Frances thought it was okay.
In 1949, Veeck sold the Indians, saying only that he needed another challenge. Privately, however, there was another reason.
I wondered why he sold the Cleveland Indians, and I asked. And Bill said, I sold the Cleveland Indians because I needed the money to pay for my divorce.
Just as suddenly as he had appeared, Veeck left Cleveland at the end of 1949, with 4 rollicking seasons in his wake.
The best way to describe it, he was the Pied Piper. And every once in a while, he'd look at you in this way, and you knew it was coming. And then you'd hear the music, and you'd look around to see if all the rats were heading to Hamlin, and he had you.
In 1951, Bill Veeck purchased his third baseball team, the woeful St. Louis Browns. With attendance at a dismal level, Veeck promised a surprise in an upcoming doubleheader against the Tigers. What he unveiled that Sunday afternoon would become his ultimate gag, unforgettable, and to some, unforgivable.
So the first thing we noticed, we bought a scorecard, and we noticed a number 1/8 Goodell in the scorecard.
And just before the game, here comes this big cardboard cake. You know, and everybody said, what's going on?
this Eddie Goodell pops up out of the cake, you know, like a stag party. Only it was Eddie Goodell.
And the funny thing about his jumping out of the cake is that everybody thought that this was Bill Veeck's big surprise. So the reporters are saying to Veeck, this is nothing. What is this? A midget jumps out of a cake? This is your big surprise?
Then, in the first inning of the second game,
I sat down on the bench and I noticed that there was a midget there.
And the PA announcer is told by Veeck to say, ladies and gentlemen, batting for Frank Saucier, number 1/8, Eddie Goodell.
We were laughing so hard nobody could say anything. I mean, you can't believe it. Little teeny guy just take little baby steps up into the on deck circle and then swinging those 3 little bats.
We all stood up on top of the dugout, our team. The Brown players all stood up on top of the dugout. And then there was silence.
Ed Hurley, the big Boston Irishman umpire, was at home plate. And he looked straight ahead. But he, with his right hand, beckoned Zach Taylor, the Browns manager, who came out of the third base dugout.
Zach had a contract in his back pocket, and he showed it to the umpire.
Veeck had been smart enough to file a contract with the league office late on a Friday afternoon, knowing that the office would be closed on Saturday and Sunday, and nobody would be in the office to review this contract.
Hurley looked at it, and he paused. You know, I'm sitting in the press box. I said, oh, Ed, don't be a stuffed shirt. Don't be a stuffed shirt. Finally, he said, pitch.
Bob came through the first pitch, and it was over Eddie's head, and the second one was over it, and the third one was over it.
Kane is laughing so hard that he's practically falling off the mound with each pitch.
And after the fourth ball, Eddie tossed his bat aside and trotted down toward first base. About a third of the way down, he stopped, took his hat off, and bowed to the crowd over on the first base side. And about another 2/3 of the way down, he stopped, bowed again to the crowd.
And then they took him out and put a runner in for him, and they had a guy on first and nobody out.
I said, Eddie, you kind of hammed it up going down to first base, didn't you? He said, man, I felt like Babe Ruth.
It all was for naught because we didn't score and we didn't win.
Immediately, Major League Baseball tried to expunge him from the record book. And for 1 year, in the official Major League record book, Eddie Goodell's name does not show up.
The next meeting, midgets were banned for life.
You know, I don't think that baseball is such a grim, serious thing. Sure, I don't want to interfere with the game, but I do want everyone who comes out to the ballpark to have fun. And look, let's face it, often the ball game is not the most exciting thing that ever's happened.
If it made him laugh, and it made the people with whom he was associated laugh, he usually went with it.
There was this gigantic hot dog that I don't know how many people had to carry the thing. They walked around and people would take bites off it as it went around the park.
Guy would win a 100-pound cake of ice. Well, 100-pound cake of ice from St. Louis on a summer night and deliver it to your seat.
For example, if you hand someone a cupcake when they come in the ballpark, you know, they look at it and they go, thanks, this is nice. But if you hand someone 10,000 cupcakes, well, if they're greedy, they're trying to keep them all. And if they're generous, they're giving them away. And it's kind of like Gandhi-esque. It works on another level.
Just 5 days after Eddie Goodell's debut, Veeck's irreverence continued with a gimmick called Grandstand Manager's Day. Fans made all-field decisions while manager Zach Taylor sat in a rocking chair. The Browns won 5-3 to break a 4-game losing streak. Veeck always said that his promotions never interfered with the game, but some obviously did.
You know, there was always parades, there was always something going on before the game. A lot of times infield was canceled, a lot of times batting practice was canceled.
It was like a 3-ring circus. You know, I mean, we were the third act to go on.
Elephants, clowns all around the field. And one of the elephants laid one right in front of the dugout. I didn't like it. I thought that, you know, I thought that was a lot of baloney.
Of course he upstaged the game. He thought he had to, because the game itself wasn't enough to bring everyone in.
By repeatedly committing baseball heresy, Veeck set himself apart from many owners. Yet they seemed agreeable when he sought their approval to move his financially strapped Browns to another city.
In Los Angeles, Bill Veeck, owner of the St. Louis Browns, has been pacing the floor. He has permission from other Major League club owners to move his franchise.
As a matter of fact, I had bought a house already in Baltimore. We had the plane tickets. Tomorrow we were going to be in Baltimore.
Once the doors closed, the Owners' Council turned on Veeck, betraying him with a 6-2 vote against the move.
They're punishing him now. They're punishing him for the midget, maybe for the black team, punishing him for fan manager night, and all these stunts, all these things that they felt had demeaned the game.
What they finally did at the end of the 1953 season, the other owners said, we will allow the Browns to move to Baltimore as long as they're owned by somebody who is not Bill Veeck.
In 1959, after 5 seasons in the doghouse, Bill Veeck's investment syndicate stepped into a family feud amongst the Comiskey heirs and snatched controlling interest in the White Sox.
It was the most memorable, most uproarious season of White Sox history.
He says, if Lopez can win the pennant with that club, he says, I'll eat crow on State Lake in downtown Chicago. And we won the pennant. He went down there, but I don't think he ate crow. I think he ate pheasant or something like that.
Veeck's tenure with the White Sox was short, sweet, and brilliant, winning the first pennant since the infamous 1919 Black Sox released 4 decades of angst on the South Side. But physically, Veeck began to show the wear of his nonstop lifestyle.
And he'd go into these coughing spells that you'd think he'd fall down and die right there. But he'd recover, and then he'd laugh and light up another cigarette.
He had just tremendous blackout spells. And smoking 3.5 packs of cigarettes a day and living on 4 3-hours sleep. It wasn't conducive to seeing, you know, the first man on the moon.
In June of 1961, Veeck sold the White Sox and began to put his personal affairs in order.
He has been diagnosed with a brain tumor that was malignant, and there was very little hope that he could survive it. But the saddest part of this was that Mary Frances was pregnant, and it was so tragic that we're talking about his death plans, and she's over there carrying the new child.
Under his doctor's orders, Veeck retreated to a rural estate on Maryland's eastern shore.
He made a lot of driftwood sculptures. He worked a lot with his hands.
He threw pots, made pottery, and collected Indian artifacts and spent a lot of time in the garden.
As months went by, Veeck's diagnosis changed. Instead of a malignant tumor, Veeck suffered from a chronic concussion brought on by his violent smoker's cough. With rest and more time outdoors, Veeck's vast store of energy returned.
When you have 6 youngsters, you have, there's actually no lack of things to do.
The Romans said that Julius Caesar could do 7 things at once. Bill Veeck could do about 9 things at once. When you'd arrive, the television was on, he'd be talking to one of his children. He'd have 2 books out that he was reading. He'd be drinking beer, and then he'd be saying, we have to go to the airport. I have a pet armadillo coming for my kids.
Then just interesting characters would wander in. There'd be an author here and somebody who did something else there, and a TV personality would stop by, and dinner there was never less than 12 or 15 around the table.
We weren't the Cleavers, and we never want to be the Cleavers.
If I needed to talk to him about something, I'd wait till he'd get into bed and put the ball game on and put his leg down next to him. And I'd go in and I'd get the leg and I'd stick it in the corner so he couldn't get at it, and I'd go, we need to talk.
Veeck made a living in the 1960s largely by being Bill Veeck. He told tales and named names on radio, TV, and in print. His book, Veeck, as in wreck, began as the last memoir of a dying man and was an instant classic.
I think Bill's greatest legacy will always be his autobiography. It is so funny and so intelligent, so well written, and gives you such a great glimpse of someplace we'd never go in any sports literature, which is inside the ownership councils.
From his White Tower perch, Veeck fired volley after volley at his former peers, styling himself as the critical conscience, the exiled prophet of the game.
And if the time comes when baseball becomes dependent on television, then if the ratings fall and they cancel the show, baseball's entire economy is shot. Eventually, when the playing talent and the cities warrant it, possibly expand those two 10-club leagues into 12 club leagues and divide them into two divisions so that you would have a north, a south, an east, and a west, and you would again play interleague play.
He had much better ideas on how to handle expansion, on how to speed up the game, on how to try to keep the minor leagues alive. All of this was ignored.
In 1970, Veeck, who had long thought the reserve clause in baseball should be phased out, testified on behalf of Curt Flood in his suit against Major League Baseball.
Bill Veeck thought that free agency would be great for baseball. What more do you have to know? How much more heretical can you be as an owner than that?
People will forever underestimate the damage that did. You know, if anybody believes that because he sent a midget up in '51 that that's what really damaged him with other owners, they're crazy. But that testifying on behalf of Flood was the nails in the coffin.
By the end of the 1960s, Veeck was completely alienated from baseball's hierarchy. For 5 years, the owners had rebuffed his efforts to buy the Washington Senators. Seeking a secure income, in 1969, he accepted the presidency of Suffolk Downs, a racetrack near Boston. 2 years later, the venture ended in financial chaos, leaving Veeck unemployed and so very far away from the game he loved.
In 1975, hovering near bankruptcy, the Chicago White Sox were a team nobody wanted. Nobody except Bill Veeck.
They tried to do everything to keep him from getting the White Sox. They thought that he was a little crazy. They thought he was undercapitalized, which he might have been. And he didn't fit their fraternity.
When we return, the patron saint of baseball's lost causes makes one last run. When Veeck, now 61, arrived at the baseball owners' meetings in December of 1975, his proposal to buy the White Sox had already been rejected on the basis that he was underfinanced. Now he was back with the additional cash the owners had demanded.
After Veeck left the room, they took a vote, and they voted him down. John Fetzer, the owner of the Tigers, said, "Look, I don't like the son of a bitch any more than you guys do, but he did what we asked him to, and we've got to revote."
Just 13 days after Veeck acquired the Sox, his chances of success were cut dramatically when the Andy Messersmith decision created free agency. What Veeck had advocated had arrived at a most inopportune time.
Missed some draft choices because of money. I learned how to operate. I think Bill taught me how to operate without money. When you have to.
He was called the bargain basement man. He would get players that people thought was hurt, and that he would rehabilitate them.
Bill allowed 25, quote, injured players to come to spring training, hoping he could find, a needle in a haystack. And he found two of us. He found me, he found Eric Soderholm. Soderholm had 25 home runs. I won 15 games and led his staff in victories.
He came up with those guys who could hit the ball out of the park, what he called rent a player. He'd sign a guy for a year, knowing that the guy was going to leave, but if he had 3 or 4 of them who could be part of his nucleus, he had success.
Veeck's mercenary sluggers and resurrected castoffs gave him one last glorious summer.
They were hitting so many home runs, and you know that song they do, that na-na-na crap. They na-na-na'd us out of town.
It was the most fun I'd ever had in the major league. You couldn't wait to go to the ballpark. Couldn't wait to put on our pajama uniforms. That's what we kind of called them, with the big collars and everything.
I think the outrageousness of the 77 team and the Southside Hitmen came from Bill Veeck owning the baseball team, the promotions at Comiskey Park.
On July the 8th, I'll be hosting the Farm Bureau's chicken catching egg throwing contest. It'll be held on the field before the game.
Wspaniałe pokazy sztucznych ognisk. Polish night, August 11th at Comiskey Park.
I think in his last stint owning the White Sox, some of the more sophisticated marketing that we now accept as common in baseball may have been a little advanced for Bill.
In 1979, Son Mike's Disco Demolition Night turned into a melee, causing the cancellation of Game 2 of a doubleheader.
The umpire-in-chief and the president of the league has declared that the playing conditions on the field will not permit them to play the second ball game.
He had everything that Bill Veeck would want in a baseball game. A sellout, a good doubleheader. Should have been a fun night. And yet, he saw his field destroyed. I remember the policeman talking to him, and he was just in a chair, smoking a cigarette, and just slumped. He just looked like the whole weight of the world was on his shoulders.
That night, as Veeck crawled into bed, his wife Mary Frances remarked, "Honey, I think you just got the midget off your back." By 1980, with player salaries spiraling and corporate ownership encroaching, Veeck was financially played out.
It was sad because Bill Veeck had done so much for the game, but it was clear that time had passed him by.
The private story is that I think Bill was done. He was sick, and he was struggling. It was very hard for Bill to make that deal.
He sells and says goodbye to his life, and as he walked out of the Sears Tower, here were cab drivers honking and yelling, "Hey, Bill, what you gonna do next?" You know, and what he was gonna do next was go have lunch with his wife, Mary Frances.
Offended by remarks of the new owners, Veeck withdrew from Comiskey Park and returned to the ballpark he called home as a boy some 50 years earlier.
Bill spent a lot of summer afternoons sitting in the bleachers at Wrigley Field, the center field bleachers, sitting in just shorts, saturating himself with baby oils, which he thought would block the sun, and buying round after round of beer for everybody who was around him, and just having a hell of a good time.
In 1984, Veeck's oldest son, Will, died at 48 of lung cancer.
I think he felt really helpless. They saw each other before he died. He had regrets.
The physical problems Veeck had battled for 4 decades began to claim him. A tumor took a piece of his lung, and paralysis numbed his hands. He struggled with deafness. His legs continued to deteriorate.
I knew he was going to die soon. His eyes were as lightest of light blues, like the blue on maps for water. And I thought, he's tired. Jesus, he's tired.
He said that he wasn't scared of dying, but what really made him sad was that he wouldn't be able to see Mary Frances anymore.
As he was waiting for the ambulance, he wrote on the back of an envelope how he loved her. And he said, "Tell the kids it's been great." It was great.
Somewhere I know that Bill is happy, very, very pleased, and not to mention astounded.
It amazes me today that Bill Veeck is in the Hall of Fame because the Hall of Fame is such an establishment thing for baseball, and Bill was so anti-establishment.
Well, if they didn't put Bill in the Baseball Hall of Fame, they might as well close it down. Gee whiz, who was baseball for 30, 40, 50 years? Who was the spirit of the game off the field?
You can't go to any major league city now and pick up the paper in a three-game series, and I know it's either ball day or bad day or free program day or a hot dog for 10-cent day. That was all that. Veeck started all of that.
Almost every ballpark now, when you hit a home run, what do? They set off fireworks.
Oh, I think he'd love it. I think he'd love the pool in Arizona, the beach in Tampa Bay.
I can't think of one time out of hundreds and thousands probably that I was with him that I didn't have a good time. It wasn't good. So the most lasting impression is we should all find people in our lives like Bill Veeck who can give us a good time, who can challenge us, and who can make us stand up and be the best of who we are.
I would tell every baseball fan who ever lived, everybody who was ever denied the right to participate, as Doby had been until he signed, everybody who believed in fair play, and everybody who could see the beauty of the game of baseball, I would tell them, who was Bill Veeck? He was you.
Veeck's legacy in the dugouts and locker rooms is secure. He was a rarity among owners, one who spoke to his players from ground level, who bought you a new suit for hitting a game-winning homer, who gave bonuses to slumping hitters. Perhaps one of his former players, Eric Soderholm, put it best when he said he was very uncomfortable if you called him Mr. Veeck. He would say, please, call me Bill. For ESPN Classic Sports Century, I'm Chris Fowler.